Okay, so yeah, hello. I've been trying to figure out how to approach this video for a while now, but I think I finally landed on the best way to do this. So, back in July 2024, almost a year ago now, the Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works Honkai Star Rail collaboration was announced. And as someone who got into anime during the pandemic and kept up with the scene here and there ever since, I was familiar with Fate and name, but I never really tried to get into it. I knew of some of the characters, namely Saber, Ren Gilgamesh, and Astolfo from memes, but the series always felt a little bit too daunting to dive into compared to a lot of other anime, just because, like another series that I tried to get into, Monogatari, it's kind of got canon scattered across different adaptations and timelines and everything, and it's a little bit difficult to follow, but because I've been playing Star Rail for about 2 years now, and I really enjoy it, I wanted to fully appreciate the Fate crossover whenever it arrived. And to do that, I knew I finally had to experience Fate for myself. Since the collab was announced so far in advance, it was clear that it would be packed with a bunch of references and stuff that would fly over my head if I didn't get a chance to at least try to experience the story before the collab. Still, I didn't fully commit to the idea until the collab was officially confirmed for July 2025 this year, and that's why I decided to buy the original Fate Stay Night visual novel and start from the beginning with the Fate route, which took about 35 hours, and I did so using my Nintendo Switch. Took me quite a while to get through the entire story, I think around 3 months total, but I pushed through the last couple of sections in the past few days as I had a lot of motivation to play it once I got things rolling. Initially, I was planning to make a Fate for Star Rail players style video that would explore the crossover references in depth, but time went on, and as I spent months just getting through the Fate route, I realized I probably wouldn't be able to finish Unlimited Blade Works and put together a full, well-researched video before the collab actually dropped. So my approach changed. Instead of trying to cram everything in, I decided it would probably be better to review each route individually, starting here. And by the time the collab begins, I will have finished Unlimited Blade Works, but I'm not confident that I'll be able to get the visual novel version fully finished by that time, so I will instead try to get out this video and then watch the Unlimited Blade Works anime, which I currently have about a date to as of recording this. Finishing the Fate route generally shifted my perspective, and now I'm wanting to go into Unlimited Blade Works as fast as possible, rather than just trying to get through the series so that way I can get ready for the Star Rail collaboration. I'm actually anticipating seeing what happens in this story after having finished the initial route. But this video will probably be the longest of the 3 route reviews, since I want to cover the foundations, stuff like how the Holy Grail works, different master system, the series 4 magic mechanics, and stuff like that. I'll also share my thoughts on the characters and story within this route, as I assume a lot will shift between the routes, since choices at key moments push a narrative in different directions. But I'll get into them when I begin to experience the other routes. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's start with the Fate route. So yeah, Fate Stay Night is a visual novel consisting of 3 routes. The first route is simply called the Fate route, or Fate Stay Night. The second, Unlimited Blade Works, and the third, Heaven's Feel. But this video will just be going over my thoughts on the Fate Stay Night route, as that is the only one I've finished as of recording this. The Star Rail collab will be focused on the Unlimited Blade Works route, so I'll be playing through that, but I probably won't have enough time to get a video like this out for the Unlimited Blade Works route. But I do plan on making one in the future anyway, and also one for Heaven's Feel as well. The story opens with a 3-day prologue told from the perspective of Artuska, a young mage and latest heir to the prestigious Saka bloodline. Day 1 begins with Ren reflecting on her late father, who once told her that he wanted to seek or her to seek the Holy Grail, a legendary item said to grant any wish for its owner for herself one day. He had participated in what would later be confirmed to be the Fourth Holy Grail War, but he never returned from it. In the present, Ren is preparing to take part in the Fifth Holy Grail War. In the World of Fate, mages are individuals who possess and can activate special magical circuits within their bodies, allowing them to perform various magecraft. These circuits are hereditary, passed down through bloodlines, and only a rare few are born with them. Mages are taught to operate in secrecy, keeping the existence of true magic hidden from the general public. Only other mages, and sometimes not even then, can identify one another. Even among mages, only a select few are chosen to be masters in the Holy Grail War. Masters are granted 3 command spells, which can be used to give absolute orders to their servants. Powerful spiritual beings summoned to fight on their behalf. Servants are manifestations of legendary figures from history, myth, and folklore, taking on personalities, appearances, and abilities based on the heroes they're modeled after. When the conditions for the Grail's manifestation are met, 7 masters are selected, and each are tasked with summoning one of the 7 servant classes: Saber, Archer, Lancer, Rider, Assassin, Berserker, and Caster. The identity of the heroic spirit summoned often reflects the nature of the master or the relics used to summon them during the ritual. For example, using an artifact tied to a specific legend increases the chances of summoning that hero regardless of the class summoned. Servants draw magical energy from their masters to sustain themselves, though they can also grow stronger by absorbing the souls of others. To protect their identities and prevent enemies from gaining insight into their powers, servants are generally referred to by their class rather than their true name. Revealing a servant's true name can expose the nature of their noble phantasm, essentially a signature move or ultimate weapon, which would not be great for the Holy Grail War. Each servant is also ranked in categories like strength, speed, magic, luck, and more, similar to stand stats in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. While these stats can offer insight into a servant's capabilities, they're not always reliable indicators of who will win in a fight. Clever strategy can often overcome raw stats, and even a weaker noble phantasm can still triumph over a stronger one if used wisely, or plot armor, basically. Servants are summoned with a single purpose: to obtain the Holy Grail. While our masters supply the magical energy they need to exist, servants generally act independently, operating according to their own judgment and goals, unless commanded directly with a command spell. Once their magical energy is depleted, a servant will fade away, making their master's role crucial but not central in combat itself. Because servants are spiritual beings, they are the only ones truly capable of battling and defeating other servants, and ultimately obtaining the Holy Grail. While masters can engage in combat, the power difference is staggering, like throwing a rock. Tank and that's not only indestructible, but moves faster than the human eye can follow. Even the slowest servants operate at speeds that render them nearly invisible to humans during battle. Masters typically take on more of a supportive role, issuing commands, forming strategies, or trying to outmaneuver other masters through indirect means. Some even choose to avoid direct combat altogether by targeting opposing masters, knowing that defeating a master removes their servant from the war. Once a servant is eliminated, their master becomes defenseless and are against the remaining servants, though they may still have some options. They can surrender, form alliances, or transfer their command spells to another master. Despite their autonomy, both servants choose to follow their master's guidance, so long as their orders align with their goal of reaching the Grail. If a servant believes the command counterproductive, dishonorable, or violates their core values, they can't disobey as long as the order isn't reinforced through a command spell. Command spells override a servant's will, exerting immense pressure that essentially forces obedience. While disobedience is technically possible, resisting a command spell weakens the servant severely, so much so that it is effectively a death sentence in the context of the Holy Grail War. The system is designed to give masters limited control, with just 3 absolute commands being their usage, strategic, and consequence. Before we get there, servants and masters share a direct magical link, allowing them to sense each other's presence and danger. If separated, they can locate one another through this bond. But that is essentially the entire servant and master system, as well as the basics of the Holy Grail War that will likely be seen throughout each individual route, but will also be seen in specifically the Fate route. We continue further. The next day at school, or with that we return to Rin Toshiga, preparing for the Fifth Holy Grail War. After reviewing her late father's will, Rin discovers her family's prized heirloom, a jewel pendant brimming with magical energy. The next day at school, Rin meets up with her friend, Ayako Mitsuri, captain of the archery club. She's surprised to find she arrived an hour early, suspecting her home clocks were mysteriously tampered with, possibly tied to the magic her father left behind. Along the way, she greets another club member, Sakura Mato, and brushes off the unwanted attention of Sakura's brother, Shinji, who also happens to be the club's vice captain. Within the school, Rin exchanges casual greetings with English teacher Taiga Fushimura and the stern student council president Issei Ryodo. She also passes by Shirou Emiya, who's seen helping Issei with a task, though she doesn't pay him much mind. Later that evening, Rin attempts to summon a Saber-class servant, performing the ritual without a catalyst, relying purely on her own magical strength. However, she soon realizes that something is off. The timing is wrong. Her distorted clocks have caused her to miscalculate the summoning window, and as a result, she inadvertently summons the first servant introduced to the reader, Archer. Archer is summoned in the middle of Rin's now-demolished living room. From the start, he proves to be unusually defiant for his servant, clearly intending to act on his own rather than following Rin's orders. Frustrated, Rin immediately uses one of her 3 precious command spells to force him into obedience. With that tension resolved, the two reluctantly agree to work together. Archer explains that he's suffering from amnesia, likely a result of the bot summoning ritual, and doesn't remember his true name. Still, he pledges to aid Rin in her pursuit of the Holy Grail. This marks the end of Day 1 of the Prologue. And as you can probably tell, even without the lengthy breakdown of the Holy Grail War and Servant Master system I added just for the context, the novel's approach is highly detailed. Every day unfolds with meticulous recounting of events. Dialogue fills hours of in-game reading time, and while much of it isn't directly related to the main plot, it plays a large role in grounding the world and developing the characters. That kind of slow burn pacing can feel tedious in parts. Sometimes it does go on about the process of being traditional Japanese breakfast for way too long. But the payoff is worth it, as when the story picks up, the contrast makes the intense moments feel sharper, more vivid, and more immense. Day 2 follows Rin as she skips school to show Archer around Fuki City. While visiting the Shinto district, the two briefly discuss a major event that occurred 10 years prior, an event that clearly still weighs on the city's memory. During the outing, Archer mentions a forbidden type of magecraft known as a reality marble, though he's cut off before he can explain it further when the two are being watched. They investigate, heading to the top of the tallest building nearby, where Rin spots Shirou Emiya in the distance. She dismisses it as a coincidence, and the two return home. On the way back, they see Sakura speaking with a strange foreigner, someone who won't appear again until much later in the story, and even then, the context for this scene is left ambiguous. I'll revisit this moment when I share my thoughts on the theories for the next 2 routes section later in the video. Finally, Rin reports to Kyrie Kusume, the official supervisor for the Fifth Holy Grail War, and informs him that she has successfully summoned Archer, revealing him to be the 6th servant to enter the war. Day 3 begins with Rin returning to school, where she immediately notices something is off. A bounded field has been set up around the building, an invisible, magical barrier designed to trap and manipulate people, undetectable to normal humans. This confirms her suspicions that another master is operating within the school. She asks Sakura about the foreigner she met the day before, but Sakura brushes it off, saying he was just asking for directions. That night, Rin stays behind to investigate the bounded field, with Archer by her side. They discover that the barrier isn't just passive, it's designed to melt any down anyone inside and convert their souls into magical energy. As Ren prepares to interfere with his activation, another servant appears, Lancer. Lancer claims he isn't responsible for the field, but immediately attacks Ren. Archer jumps in to defend her, and the two servants clash in the courtyard. Lancer dominates in close combat, while Archer can only summon swords to block Lancer's relentless spear strikes. The battle is intense as Lancer readies his noble phantasm, but ends in a stalemate when Lancer senses someone watching them and breaks off to eliminate the witness. In the Holy Grail War, secrecy is critical, and any civilian who sees a servant risks being silenced permanently. Ren and Archer pursue Lancer but arrive too late. The student's already mortally wounded, and Lancer's gone. Fearing Sakura's reaction, Ren is overwhelmed with guilt and uses her most valuable possession, Father's heirloom pendant, to save the student's life. She sends Archer to track down Lancer while she heads home, now without the pendant. Archer eventually returns with the jewel, having failed to find Lancer or his master. While Ren talks about her reasons for participating in the Holy Grail War, she revisits that she doesn't wish for the Grail at all. She simply wants to win. But as she reflects on the student's survival, she realizes Lancer will likely return to finish the job. She rushes to the student's home, only to find a huge burst of magical energy erupting nearby. There, she and Archer witness Lancer fleeing the scene, only to be intercepted by a new, sword-wielding servant. A fierce clash erupts. Archer is gravely wounded while shielding Ren from the servant's strike, forcing Ren to use her second command spell to return him to spirit form, saving his life but sidelining him from the fight. Now defenseless, Ren finds herself at the end of the blade of the seventh and final servant, Saber. She braces for the worst, believing her end is inevitable. This prologue serves as to introduce the reader to many of the major characters, locations, and systems that will be a common through line between the three routes. Mages, magecraft, servants, masters, the Holy Grail War, classes, all receive brief explanations, with my explanations provided earlier serving to fill some gaps left ambiguous in the introduction, but will be fleshed out more throughout the Fate route, but I'm going ahead and explaining them now just to save time later. And I don't really plan to revisit these systems and re-explain them in the next two routes, which is why I think this section will be longer in this version, but the next two versions will have a much shorter introduction. This prologue is narrated from the perspective of Ren, a fairly experienced mage with a natural talent for magic, so having her explain the rules and systems of the world in the prologue makes sense, as the rest of this route, beginning from day 1 of the prologue again, is instead narrated by the protagonist of the Fate route, Shirou Emiya. Shirou is woken up by Sakura, a close friend who regularly visits to help around the house. He lives alone under the legal guardianship of Taiga Fujimura, whom he calls Fujini. Shirou was adopted by the late Yuritsugu Emiya, a mage who rescued him from the aftermath of a massive fire in the Shinto district 10 years ago. Since then, Shirou has been trying to learn magecraft on his own, though with little success. He knows a simple reinforcement spell, but beyond that, his talents are limited. Still, he clings to an ideal to become a hero of justice, someone who can save others and prevent future tragedies like the fire he barely survived. He's haunted by recurring nightmares of the night, flames, ash, and strangely, visions of endless swords. On the news, Shirou hears about a recent gas leak in Shinto that left multiple victims in comas. At school, he briefly runs into Ren while helping Issei, the student council president. After classes, he encounters a strange white-haired girl who gives him a cryptic warning before vanishing. You'd better summon one soon, or you'll die. Day 2, Sakura visits again, but this time Shirou notices bruises on her wrist. She brushes it off, denying her brother Shinji had anything to do with it, though Shirou remains unconvinced. At school, Issei informs Shirou about the gruesome murder that occurred in its neighborhood, an entire family. is wiped out. Later that day, Shirou spots what appears to be Rin standing atop a skyscraper in the Shinto district. The sight unsettles him, but he dismisses it as a coincidence. Day 3, Sakura tells Shirou she won't be able to visit over the weekend due to an errand. That morning, Shirou discovers a strange mark glowing on the back of his hand, unaware that these are command spells, a sign that he's been chosen to participate in the Holy Grail War. At school, he begins to notice something strange in the air, unease, as if something magical is at work in the building. After class, Shinji ropes him into cleaning the archery dojo, even though Shirou is no longer a member of the club. That night, while cleaning, Shirou stumbles upon Archer and Lancer locked in combat. Lancer notices him watching and gives chase. Shirou attempts to flee, but Lancer quickly catches and strikes him down. As he begins to lose consciousness, a familiar voice speaks to him, but his vision is too blurred to see who it is. When Shirou wakes up, his wounds are completely healed. All that remains of the scene is a jewel pendant he doesn't recognize. He brings it home, unaware that it belongs to Ren. Later that night, Lancer ambushes him once again. Shirou tries to defend himself with reinforcement magic, but he's no match. Just as Lancer prepares to kill him, Shirou instinctively activates a summoning circle, and the light reveals a new servant, Saber. Saber immediately clashes with Lancer, wielding an invisible sword. Lancer reveals his identity as an Irish hero and unleashes noble phantasm, Epilogue, a cursed spirit that reverses causality to ensure it strikes the heart. Saber survives thanks to her high luck stat, and Lancer retreats under orders from his unseen master. Before Shirou can catch his breath, Saber senses another enemy nearby and charges outside, straight into Archer and Ren. Saber easily overpowers Archer, forcing Ren to use a command spell to save him. With Saber now turning her blade on Ren, Shirou intervenes, confused and overwhelmed by the unfolding chaos. While this catches up to the end of the prologue, D3 still has a little bit more to unpack from Shirou's perspective. After the battle, Ren brings Shirou and Saber to the church to formally explain the Holy Grail War. There they met Kotomi, the overseer of the Fifth War, and someone who, unbeknownst to Shirou until now, also participated in the Fourth Holy Grail War, the very event that caused Shirou, or the fire that Shirou survived 10 years ago. This raises immediate questions. If Kyrie took part in the previous war, did he win? If not, why is he overseeing this one? Is becoming an overseer a reward for surviving a past war, or maybe some sort of punishment? And if the Grail can truly grant any wish, assuming Kyrie won, why would someone risk their life again instead of simply wishing for another Grail, or infinite Grails, like what people say you should do if you find a genie in a lamp? For now, Kyrie taunts Shirou's idea of a hero of justice before offering him the choice to back out. He can abandon the war and seek refuge in the church if he wishes. Saber strongly disagrees, urging him to fight. Shirou, still unsure of what's right, but unwilling to back down, officially accepts his role as the Seventh Master. After they leave the church, Shirou encounters the white-haired girl again, Elisabeth von Einsburn, and her servant, Berserker. Ilya is revealed to be a German master, and Berserker is none other than the Greek hero Heracles. The two launch a sudden attack. Berserker ultimately overwhelms Saber, and when it looks like she might be killed, Shirou throws himself in front of her, taking the blow in her place. This act of self-sacrifice confuses Ilya. For reasons unknown, she orders Berserkers to stand down and the two retreat, leaving Shirou greatly wounded, Saber stunned, and the two as having officially been participating in the Holy Grail War. At this point in the story, we've been introduced to 3 confirmed masters, Rin, Shirou, and Ilya, and 4 servants, Archer, Saber, Lancer, and Berserker. Of these servants, 2 have already had their identities revealed. Lancer is Cuchulainn, the Irish Child of Light, and Berserker is the Greek demigod Heracles. Archer, on the other hand, claims to suffer from amnesia, which prevents him from disclosing his true name. Saber's identity remains concealed, both by her invisible sword and by a more subtle misdirection that I'll discuss later, once the story itself discusses Saber's true name. So far, the narrative is carefully distributing information, giving pieces of a broader puzzle without immediately overwhelming the reader. The slow reveal of names and identities invites speculations and close attention to details, especially for those familiar with myth and legend. The type of structure builds tension well, but it also emphasizes the difference in perspective between characters like Shirou, who is new to the world, and Ren, who has already come into it prepared. And that leads me to one of my key thoughts on this early part of the story, the narrator shift. While the transition from Ren to Shirou was clear and structurally sound, it's not confusing or disorienting, I found myself missing Ren's point of view. Her perspective in the prologue was methodical, sharp, and confident. She knew the rules of the game, or at least enough to act with agency. Shirou, by contrast, starts from a position of almost total ignorance. He's thrust into a war he doesn't understand, with ideals that sound noble but lack grounding in real experience. This inherently isn't a flaw. In fact, it's a classic setup. The powerless boy who becomes special is a well-trodden trope in anime and visual novels. But it does mean that the early part of Fate's main route runs the risk of feeling familiar or conventional compared to the promise of the prologue. That said, I do suspect the choice was intentional. The Fate route seems to be designed to serve as a baseline, a way of introducing the core mechanics and values of the world while gradually building towards its seasons. It's not just about holy grails and heroic spirits, it's about how different people interpret ideals, power, and justice. Starting from Shirou's naive perspective allows the story to walk the reader through the structure of the Holy Grail War step by step, while still planting seeds of doubt and contradiction. The route appears to sacrifice some narrative sharpness in exchange for accessibility, using Shirou's ignorance as a vehicle for explanation. Of course, this also makes me wonder how different things will feel when I eventually get to Unlimited Blade Works, since that route seems to be more focused on Ren and Archer. I'm expecting a sharper philosophical contrast, perhaps even more critical interrogation of Shirou's ideals. For now, though, I can't help but feel the shift in tone. Gone from a veteran mage with wit and confidence to a self-sacrificing idealist who doesn't yet understand the stakes he stepped in. Still, even in the early days, the story has managed to layer in mystery, world-building, and character tension effectively. While I had my reservations about the narrator shift, I'm still invested in where the story is going and curious to see how it continues to evolve themes. But now, on to day 4. Shirou dreams of Kiritsugu's final moments, a quiet, heavy memory in which his adoptive father, already on the verge of death, extracts a promise from Shirou to carry on his ideals. It's here we see the roots of Shirou's moral compass, his vow to become a hero of justice, a figure who saves others at all costs, no matter the personal toll. The dream serves as both backstory and internal motivator, giving weight into Shirou's decisions moving forward. His pursuit of that ideal isn't simply naive, it's a legacy of the dying man he admired, even if he only half understood it at the time. Shirou wakes up fully healed from Berserker, devastating blow, back in his home. Ren found him unconscious after his battle and stayed through the night to take care of him. Although she claims she didn't use any magic to restore him, Shirou's wounds have mysteriously vanished. Ren suspects this miraculous healing may be a power granted by Saber, further evidence that Shirou's connection with his servant is unusual. Despite their rocky introduction, Ren and Shirou agree to form a temporary alliance. Ren, a capable and strategic mage, recognizes that Shirou, idealistic and largely untrained, is in an aforesaid. With Archer seriously wounded and Shirou unable to grasp the gravity of the war he's been pulled into, they have little choice but to cooperate. Their most immediate threat is Ilia, a master from one of the oldest and most powerful mage lineages, and her servant, Berserker. Against such overwhelming force, survival alone becomes a shared goal. During this period, Shirou begins to bond with Saber. He learns that she is unable to take on spirit form or properly receive mana from him due to their incomplete contract. This puts her at a severe disadvantage compared to other servants, who can regenerate and stay hidden when not engaged in combat. Saber also refuses to reveal her true name, explaining that it's a matter of tactical security. If an enemy master discovers her identity, they may be able to use that knowledge to exploit her weaknesses through command spells or targeted magecraft. Saber also lets slip that she had been summoned in the previous Holy Grail War, hinting at a longer, more complicated history. This detail, that Saber fought in the last war, is an interesting development. It raises immediate questions about how the Holy Grail system works. If Saber participated before, why was she summoned again? Does failing to obtain the Grail result in repeated summons until the servant succeeds? That seems unlikely, since the other three servants we've seen, Archer, Lancer, and Berserker, are seemingly different heroic spirits than those that previously filled those roles, as Saber doesn't recognize them. Though Saber also doesn't acknowledge Kyrie despite him participating in the previous war, but there's a chance the two never interacted. Those are some possible explanations, but another is the idea that servants summoned in different Holy Grail wars are drawn from the same collective of heroic spirits, but their summoning is largely random unless specific artifacts are used to target a particular one. Saber's reappearance may be the result of such an artifact, or a deeper connection between her and the Grail itself. Still, the system seems a little inconsistent. If Saber didn't win the Grail last time, and if Heracles, as Berserker, were to win it now, would that permanently remove him from the summoning pool? Or could he return in a future war, even after having his wish granted? On day 5, the morning begins with Sakura and Taiga making their usual visits to Shirou's house, only to discover Rin unexpectedly living there. Their reactions, a mix of confusion and dismay, as Rin, the usually composed and somewhat aloof honor student, is now seemingly playing house with Shirou. Quick on her feet, Rin explains that her home is undergoing renovations and that she's staying in a separate wing of the house, a half-truth that placates both Sakura and Taiga, though not without suspicion. On their way to school, Rin and Shirou run into Shinji, who once again confronts Sakura. His aggressive demeanor is met with an uncharacteristically sharp rebuke from Rin, who asserts her alliance with Shirou, sending Shinji off in frustration. This moment signals a major power shift. Shinji, once in control of his relationship with Shirou and Sakura, now finds himself undermined and outmaneuvered by someone far more competent. At lunch, Rin reveals far more pressing concerns. A boundless field has been erected over the school grounds. This magical construct, when activated, will drain the life force from anyone within its range, indiscriminately. Students, staff, and likely even the caster themselves if they aren't careful. It's an act of terrifying disregard for human life, and its 10-day countdown adds a layer of urgency to the previous meandering pace. For Shirou, who is already morally opposed to the collateral damage caused by Mei's conflicts, this discovery is both enraging and invigorating. Later that day, Shirou returns home and decides to formally introduce Saber to both Taiga and Sakura. Though Saber is meant to remain hidden, Shirou insists she not isolate herself. The tone abruptly shifts into something more comedic. Taiga, believing Saber to be a suspicious freeloader, challenges her to a Shinai duel. Unsurprisingly, she loses spectacularly. Saber, once again playing the knight in more ways than one, wins her over by invoking her supposed past acquaintance with Kiritsu, an improvised but effective lie that adds to the domestic absurdity of the moment. While these scenes of character interactions and hints of underlying tension, Day 5 is where the pacing, or offer character interactions and hints of underlying tension. Day 5 is where the pacing begins to noticeably slack. The juxtaposition between life and death, magical warfare, and lighthearted slice of life antics feel jarring. The total dissonance, while characteristic of the story's broader identity, starts to wear a bit thin here. Much of the day-to-day is spent on domestic comedy, banter, and situational awkwardness, while giving us a sense of the characters' day-to-day lives, dreams, and momentum from the high-stakes narrative set up in the earlier days. From a structural standpoint, it's clear that the VN is attempting to give the reader a break before ramping things up again. However, this emotional break sort of overstays its welcome. The tension built up from the battle with Berserker and the implications of Saber's past are paused in favor of mundane school life and household antics. While this may work for players deeply invested in the characters, it risks losing others who were more for the were here more for the floating mystery and mythological intrigue. Personally, this day marked a turning point in my engagement. While I had been reading steadily up to this point, the slowdown in pacing and tonal shift made it harder to stay invested. Felt like the plot hit a wall as things were just getting interesting. Though I continued reading, this next section made me almost drop the story entirely. The morning news reports yet another gas leak incident, code by now for another wave of victims drained of life force. Rin quickly deduces that the source must be far more experienced and powerful master than the one behind the school's bounded field. Unlike the crude setup at school, this enemy is draining energy from a distance, suggesting their servants' capabilities or reach are significantly higher. While investigating the field at school, Shirou follows magical traces back to the archery dojo, where he is confronted by Shinji. With thinly veiled smugness, Shinji reveals himself as a master and invites the cause of Shirou to the Maotao residence. There, he introduces his servant, Ryder. Shinji explains that although Maotao bloodline of Bages has long since declined, he still managed to summon Ryder, framing it as an impressive feat, though his posture and tone suggest overcompensation. Shinji claims he isn't the one responsible for the deadly field and proposes an alliance to take down Rin, exposing his jealousy and long-standing resentment toward her talent. Shinji, still suspicious, refuses. Instead, he asks whether Sakura is involved in the war, expressing concern for her safety. Shinji assures him that she is not, a statement that feels deliberately evasive. As a token of good faith, or perhaps bait, Shinji informs Shirou of another master, a witch said to be collecting souls on a much larger scale within Ryudo Tempo. Shirou verifies this lead during a brief interaction with Issei, who lives at the temple and mentions a reclusive woman recently taking residence there. Shirou returns home and relays everything to Saber and Rin. They're both furious that he ventured alone into enemy territory, especially Shinji, whose intentions are clearly self-serving. Rin is skeptical of Shinji's intel, but Saber, drawing on her past war experience, notes that Ryudo Tempo sits on a powerful ley line and has a natural defensive barrier, making it an ideal location for a master stronghold. Despite Saber's warning, both Rin and Shirou agree that attacking the temple without more information would be reckless. Frustrated by their caution and convinced that acting swiftly is better, Saber takes matters into her own hands. That night, Saber sends him out alone and is confronted at the temple gate by the servant assassin. Their duel is deliberate and methodical, more like a formal test of skill than an all-out brawl. Assassin soon reveals his identity, Sasuke Kujiro, a swordsman known only through legend. He demonstrates his noble phantasm, Tsubame Kaishi, a seemingly unavoidable triple strike technique. While the attack is incomplete due to the restrictive terrain, it still poses a threat. Saber narrowly avoids the attack, preparing to respond with her own noble phantasm. Before this happens, Shirou, who had been following Saber, arrives and is attacked by a hidden third party. Assassin, realizing the interloper's goal is to observe Saber's noble phantasm and identify her true name, interrupts the fight and lets him go. Saber collapses from magical exhaustion, and Shirou carries her back home. The next morning, Saber and Shirou class. or clash, not physically, but ideologically. Shirou insists on fighting to protect her, despite his obvious disadvantage to mage in a swordsman. Saber, naturally, is incredulous. She sees his ideal as naive and insulting, especially coming from someone too weak to even survive a single servant blow. The conversation becomes tense, exposing the core of Shirou's internal contradiction. He refuses to let others get hurt, even if it means hurting himself. Rin steps in and provides additional context. Shirou doesn't want to protect Saber. He sees himself as unworthy of being protected. His survivor's guilt and obsessive pursuit of his father's dream twist into a martyr complex. Ultimately, the three reach a compromise. Saber will train Shirou in swordsmanship, while Rin instructs him in the basics of magecraft. It's not ideal, but it gives Saber an outlet to grow without sidelining Saber completely. However, the section of the story introduces what is arguably the most controversial aspect of Shirou's character, his attitude toward women in combat. While the intended message is that Shirou doesn't want anyone, regardless of their gender, to be hurt on his behalf, the execution undermines that. His dialogue during the argument with Saber is framed deeply in paternalistic terms. Rather than asserting that he doesn't want his allies in danger, Shirou repeatedly frames Saber's participation as something a girl shouldn't be doing, which gives the impression of a traditional gender bias rather than pure idealism. Even the author has acknowledged that this portion was not written clearly or effectively as intended. While some readers might forgive Shirou's view as an extension of his trauma or inexperience, they're undeniably grating, and Saber's cool-headed responses only make his tone feel worse by contrast. Personally, this exchange made it hard to remain empathetic toward Shirou. While his ideals are rooted in a desire to help others, his inability to articulate those ideals without resorting to condescension deeply weakens his character at this stage. It's clear that the story wants us to see Shirou's growth from a misguided idealist into something more nuanced, but this particular moment is where that idealism borders on toxic self-delusion. Ultimately, it wouldn't be the last time Shirou's lack of self-awareness brings the story down, and I'll touch on that in Day 7, as the next moment made it arguably much worse. The next day begins with Shirou learning that Rin sent Sakura away from his son, striking a deal with her. Rin will leave the house in 1 week, provided Sakura doesn't visit during that time. The supposed reason is to protect Sakura from the dangers of the Holy Grail War. That same morning, Daiga mentioned that classmate Ayako Mitsuri narrowly escaped an attempted assault the day prior. Though she's physically unharmed, Shirou reacts with an offhand comment. It'll probably teach Mitsuri a thing or two about being feminine. This was a moment that completely derailed my engagement with the story. I had to pause reading and spend over an hour searching for forums, translations, and discussions to see if this line had been mistranslated, reinterpreted, or acknowledged, and I found some people saying it was a mugging that she was involved in, but Shirou's reaction still called for, even if the context is slightly different. Even if it was intended as a throwaway joke or a product of a different time in VN writing, it's delivered within the context of an assault, making it unambiguously gross. The framing minimizes the traumatic event and uses it to reinforce sexist gender expectations. It's not just a bad joke, but an appalling one, and one that Shirou directs toward a friend no less. Given the comments he made towards Saber the previous day, this wasn't an isolated incident, but was a trend of Shirou's character. And while I understand that the story is fundamentally about Shirou's ideals being tested, and that this route is meant to show his immaturity and naivety, this moment crossed a line that made it genuinely difficult to continue reading. It's one thing to portray a flawed protagonist, it's another to have them say things that wouldn't feel out of place coming from a villain, and then acting like it's nothing. It took me a while to get back into the story after that. I chose to move on, but couldn't ultimately shake the overall discomfort. To add insult to injury, Mitsuri is never mentioned again for the rest of this route. I will say, looking back on it, Shirou does have moments later on that do redeem him somewhat, but I do not fully believe at least at the end of the shroud, that he is a misogynist. But these moments are genuinely an awful look for the protagonist of the story to be engaging in. Moving forward, Shirou skips school to train with Saber, who drills him relentlessly. The sparring sessions become a form of bonding, and Saber's stoic but sincere dedication to helping Shirou improve stands in sharp contrast to ways spoken about her up to now. A moment of genuine connection, even if it's undercut by the baggage of previous scenes. Later, while walking through the shopping district, Shirou unexpectedly encounters Ilia. Surprisingly, she shows no hostility and only wishes to talk. They converse in a nearby park, where Ilia briefly opens up about herself and her life at the castle on the outskirts of town. Before Shirou can ask more, she excuses herself, saying Berserker has awakened. It's brief, but an intriguing encounter that humanizes Ilia and deepens the mystery surrounding her. Returning home, the visual novel indulges in a cliché. Shirou accidentally walks in on Saber, bathroom. The scene is played for comedy, with Saber unbothered by his intrusion and Shirou flustered beyond reason. That evening, Shirou meets with Rin to begin magic training. She discovers he lacks a magical crest, a crucial component in passing down generational magecraft. Surprised, Rin postpones training and gives him a brief lesson on what magic crests are and how they're used. Outside the house, Shirou encounters Archer for the first time in several days. The tension between the two is immediate. Archer, cynical as always, challenges Shirou's idea of becoming a hero of justice. It's one of the substantive conversations Shirou has with someone who doesn't coddle or indulge his worldview, and for that reason, it was a nice change of pace. Whether or not you like Archer, seeing Shirou actually challenged by someone felt refreshing, especially after the uncritical tone the story had taken toward his behavior over the last 2 days. Shirou's training with Saber continues, deepening their bond and curiosity about her past. The day unfolds relatively peacefully, punctuated by a surprise visit from Issei, and some well-meaning gifts from Taiga. Saber gets a lion-stuffed animal from Taiga and claims to have cared for a baby lion in the past, with Shirou seeing the memory of her and the lion as a vision. She claims to like lions, but it's commonly associated with dragons. Things take a turn when Rin arrives and recounts an unsettling encounter with Shinji. He approached her with an offer to ally with her, laced with thinly veiled insults and an invitation to betray Shirou. Rin, unfazed, rejects him outright, delivering a punch for good measure. Shirou is horrified by the violence, underscoring once again his discomfort with aggressive confrontation. Later, Rin resumes Shirou's magical training. In a pivotal moment, she forces him to ingest a jewel that activates his dormant magic circuit, allowing him to begin switching it on at will, a major step forward in his magecraft development. Later that night, Shirou unexpectedly crosses paths with Archer, who, despite his unusual cynicism, offers rare advice. The key to overcoming a stronger opponent is to imagine something capable of defeating them. The plot doesn't move forward dramatically. Day 8 is well-paced and filled with engaging character interactions, unlike earlier comedic segments that dragged on. In this, Day 8 strikes a better balance between levity, the moment, and momentum. The lion scene was fun, and Archer's advice builds on important ideas explored later. For Day 9, training continues. Shirou continues sparring with Saber, while Rin skips school to assist with his magical growth. During a break, Saber and Rin stumble upon the shred where Shirou used to train alone, and are horrified to discover he'd been practicing projection magic, a dangerously taxing and advanced form of magecraft. Before they can confront him about it, a phone call interrupts. Shinji demands Shirou come to the school, alone. Once there, Shirou searches the ground warily. Without warning, the school's bounded field activates Bloodfort Andromeda. The air turns vicious, and students begin to collapse, their life force drained in a grotesque spectacle. Shinji and Ryder stand revealed as the perpetrators. The sight plunges Shirou into a spiral of trauma, flashing back to the aftermath of the Great Fire. Unlike earlier tonal missteps, this moment commits to horror with an unsettling clarity. The suffocating dread and slow unraveling of normalcy felt chilling rather than exploitative. Personally, this was the point where fate route began to pull me back in. While I had been struggling to read more than a couple of hours a night, this sharp tonal shift gripped me. Shirou confronts Shinji, who remains smug and unrepentant. Shirou usually dodges his half-hearted magical attacks until Ryder steps in. Though she hesitates to kill him directly, she knocks him through a window with a brutal kick. Mid-fall, Shirou uses a command spell to summon Saber, who arrives just in time to catch him. They return to the building, where Saber fends off Ryder while Shirou subdues Shinji. Defeated, Shinji reluctantly orders Ryder to dismantle the bounded field. Instead of surrender, Ryder shields Shinji and uses her noble phantasm to trigger a dramatic escape. Shirou collapses from exhaustion. He awakens later at home, healed. Kyrie had intervened to clean up the school and manage the aftermath. Miraculously, no one died. Reflecting on everything, Shirou finally apologizes to Saber for his earlier stubbornness and acknowledges that fighting alone is both foolish and selfish. Though hesitant, Saber agrees to let him fight beside her. It was nice to finally see him move past his reservations that had been problematic for me in Day 6 and made it where it was at least tolerable for me to be reading from his perspective again. But honestly, even while writing this, after having finished the story, the line in Day 7 still really bugs me. Day 10. Haunted by a nightmare of the recent attack at school and filled with guilt over his inability to prevent it, Shirou leaks to track down Shinji before more harm can be done. With Saber at his side, he spends the day scouring the city. However, noticing his growing fatigue, Saber leads him to Fuuki Central Park to rest. There, the mood softens as the evening settles in. Shirou opens up to Saber about the park's significance. It was ground zero for the Great Fire 10 years ago, the traumatic aftermath of the previous Holy Grail War that had left him an orphan. This moment deepens Saber's understanding of Shirou's resolve. He fights not for glory or vengeance, but to prevent others from experiencing the kind of suffering he had endured. It's a quiet but resonant exchange, and it does a lot to further the emotional bond. Later that night, Saber senses Ryder atop a nearby skyscraper. The tension escalates quickly. Ryder ambushes Shirou, but Saber intervenes, parrying the attack and giving chase up the side of a building. Believing Shinji must be present too, Shirou heads to the rooftop. As Saber and Ryder clash, steel ringing against steel, Ryder escalates the battle by summoning her mount, the mythical Pegasus. The tide turns against Saber, who struggles to keep up. Meanwhile, Shirou reaches the rooftop and confronts Shinji. In desperation, Ryder unleashes their noble phantasm, Bellerophon, a devastating charge. To protect Shirou, Saber reveals her own noble phantasm, Excalibur, and obliterates Ryder in a single blinding strike. Her golden blade flashes, and with it, her identity is unmasked, King Arthur, reimagined as a woman. This thing was satisfyingly hype. While I had been curious to see how other fights had been animated, the visual novel delivered this moment with such weight and clarity that I didn't feel like anything was missing. It was hype in the best way possible. More importantly, it reignited my full investment in the story. From this point on, the pacing no longer felt like a problem, not because things sped up, but because I was fully hooked. Any moment that felt slow afterward wasn't dragging, it was building anticipation, and caused me to feel a better type of impatience than what I had felt with the story before. Saber's true identity adds more interesting layers to her character, which are only beginning to unfold. Her backstory quickly becomes one of my favorite arcs, not just in Fate, but across animes and visual novel in general. But we'll dive deeper into that as more is revealed. For now, the battle concludes. With Ryder defeated, Shinji's command spells, bound to a book, are incinerated, stripping him of his status as a master. He flees in disgrace, but victory comes at a cost. Saber collapses after unleashing Excalibur. Shirou carries her back home, where Rin explains the gravity of their situation. Saber has depleted nearly all of her magical energy. If she doesn't recover, she'll vanish entirely. Wait to the top of my page. Luckily, we just started day 11. There's day 15, so we got a while. Day 12. Okay. And day 11. Shirou begins the day with a vision of Saber's past, her origins as Ortoria, the girl who drew the sword from the stone and became the legendary King Arthur. The memory is stark and somber, a young girl burdened with unimaginable responsibility, devoting herself entirely to her kingdom at the cost of her own identity and desires. A lonely path, one of sacrifice without thanks. Later, after discussing Saber's situation with the now-recovered archer, Shirou walks out of the park to clear his head. There, he unexpectedly runs into Ilia, but unlike their previous friendly encounters, her demeanor is completely shifted. Cold and hostile, Ilia reveals that she and Berserker were watching the battle with Ryder. She paralyzes Shirou with her mystic eyes and kidnaps him. Shirou awakens, bound inside Ilia's lavish but eerie room in Iceburn Castle. Ilia reveals her plan. She intends to preserve Shirou's soul and make him her personal servant, keeping him with her forever. Shirou, of course, refuses. Feeling rejected, Ilia storms out, casually admitting that she killed Shunji the previous night as he tried to flee. She declares her intention to kill Saber and Rin next. Struggling against the bindings, Shirou eventually frees himself, just in time to meet Saber, Rin, and Archer as they arrive, having infiltrated the castle without resistance to rescue him. But their escape is short-lived. Ilia and Berserker, who never actually left, confront them in the halls. To protect the others, Archer insists on staying behind to face Berserker alone. Rin reluctantly agrees, and before they depart, Archer gives Shirou a final cryptic message. He tells him not to imagine himself as a warrior or killer, but as someone who creates. He says Shirou's strength won't come from fighting an enemy, but from overcoming himself. The only opponent Shirou needs to defeat is his own mind. The trio escapes into the forest, but Saber's condition worsens quickly. Unable to travel further, they take refuge in an abandoned shack for the night. They realize they must fight Berserker head-on, and Rin proposes a way to restore Saber's strength. A risky ritual, Shirou transplants parts of his magic circuit into Saber, deepening their bond and settling the stage for the battle ahead. The scene of the transfer is intense, with Shirou experiencing a distorted flow of time as he views the concepts of magic circuits. The pain is indescribable, yet at times numbingly intense as he sees a dragon form in the midst of Saber's circuits that ends up devouring him. I later learned that this scene was a censored version, like another that happens later on, instead of the explicit version the ritual implies. But honestly, this version is really cool, and I vastly prefer it due to how interesting and different the experience was compared to the other descriptions of pain Shirou goes through. Which, there's a lot of different descriptions of pain Shirou has throughout the course of the novel, so this one being notable is a nice change of pace. The next morning, Ilia and Berserker arrive. Though Archer is gone, he managed to slay Berserker 6 times before falling. With Saber somewhat restored, the trio initiates their plan. Saber and Shirou will draw Berserker's attention, allowing Rin to land a surprise blow. The battle begins. Saber duels Berserker on more equal terms now, and Rin executes her part of the plan, allowing herself to be grabbed just long enough to land a powerful attack. Using half of her magical gems, she decapitates Berserker in a blinding strike. But then, Berserker regenerates. His noble phantasm, God Hand, is his own body, a nearly immortal shell that grants resurrection up to 12 times. With his full strength restored, Berserker turns the tide. He injures Shirou and prepares to kill Rin. Saber, ready to sacrifice herself, prepares Excalibur, but Shirou stops her using her command spell. He finally understands what Archer meant. Instead of brute strength, Shirou embraces his true talent, projection magic. Channeling the image of Saber's past, he traces and recreates Caliber, her former holy sword. With Saber's help, they strike together, unleashing a combined blow that wipes out all of Berserker's remaining lives. Before fading, Berserker regains a brief moment of clarity, a human, almost tragic ending to his monstrous rule. Ilia, now out of the war and reeling from Berserker's loss, collapses. Despite all she's done, Shirou can't bring himself to leave her behind, convinced that she isn't truly evil. He carries her with them as they leave the forest. Archer's sacrifice, meanwhile, leaves behind more questions than answers. He somehow managed to kill Berserkers 6 times and could summon swords at will, despite being classified as an archer. But I've already been spoiled that he and Ren are critical to the events of Unlimited Blade Work. His role here is primarily that of a guide for Shirou. His cryptic advice, mysterious powers, and final stand feed directly into several theories I'm holding on to, but I'll save those for when I'm going to discuss more on the information revealed about the Archer class later in the round. Day 12. Shirou experiences another. Though her rule brought stability and peace, it came at a steep personal cost. By casting aside her humanity to become a flawless monarch, Saber became an unreachable figure, even to her most loyal knights. Her emotionless resolve and boyish appearance sparked doubts among those she ruled, yet she never wavered in her duty. She chose to remain alone, a perfect king, but not a person. With Berserker defeated, life returns to tentative normalcy. Ilia now lives in Shirou's home, much to Ren Saber's dismay, but Shirou refuses to leave her in Kyrie's care, still unsure of the priest's true intention. Ilia, in gratitude and perhaps guilt, pledges to help Shirou win the Holy Grail War. Shirou resumes his training under Saber and Ren, learning more about projection, Saber's history, and the battle ahead. Saber's attitude has noticeably changed. During their trainer, she's gentler, less cold. She seems uneasy whenever Shirou is alone with Ren or Ilia and is far more flustered around him. There's an emotional undercurrent now. Quiet shift in how she views Shirou, perhaps how she views herself as well. That night, Saber seeks Shirou out. She reveals that, just as he had seen her past, she too has dreamt of his. The great fire that scarred him, the source of his deepest trauma. She recognizes their mirrored lives, 2 people shaped by catastrophe, trying to save others to atone for what they couldn't prevent. Saber, however, is frustrated by Shirou's acceptance of his past. She still believes in changing fate and fighting for the impossible, whereas Shirou resigned himself to what cannot be undone. While short, very dialogue and exposition heavy, this day introduces what I think is the most compelling thematic conflict in the route. The parallels and contrasts between Saber's and Shirou. Their shared loneliness, ideals, trauma make them perfect mirrors, but also highlight their core differences in philosophy. It also reframes some of Shirou's earlier choices, especially on Day 6, in a more sympathetic light. With this new perspective, I'm beginning to understand his actions more, even if I still take issue with some of the things. But that deeper analysis will come later, after I finish the last 4 sections of this route. I'll be doing a full breakdown on the 3 central characters, Shirou, Saber, and Ren, and how their ideals shape the story. Day 13, Shirou experiences yet another vision of Saber's past, this time seeing the full consequences of her isolated role. Though she had led her country to peace, her refusal to express human emotion created a chasm between her and her people, ultimately alienating even her most trusted knights. He witnesses Merlin's warning before she drew Caliber, cautioning her about the lonely path and heavy burden of kingship, and yet, she chose it regardless, believing it was necessary for the sake of her country, even if it meant walking toward inevitable ruin. The vision ends at the Battle of Camlorn, Saber's final stand, where she dies alone, betrayed, and defeated, her kingdom reduced to ashes. Unable to accept the sheer injustice of her fate, Shirou makes a vow. He will save Saber and offer her the peace and recognition she was denied in life. Back in the present, the group resumes their daily routines. Rin notes that the Master of Ryu, the temple, seems to have gone dormant and begins investigating. In a private conversation about Saber, Rin theorizes that Saber still possesses Avalon, the legendary sheath of Excalibur. But Shirou corrects her, telling Rin it was stolen from her prior to the summoning, which is why she fell to the Battle of Camelot. Later, haunted by his visions of the past, Shirou asks Saber directly about her wish. Reluctantly, she confesses that, on the brink of death, she made a contract with the world in exchange for the chance of obtaining the Holy Grail. This deal turned her into an incomplete servant, one trapped in a temporal loop, summoned endlessly to retrieve the Grail, only to be returned to the moment of her death if she fails. This explains how she was chosen again to be summoned for another attempt at the Grail, and it seems as if she is unable to attain it here. She will be summoned until she inevitably does. Her wish is not for salvation, but for erasure. She wants to undo or redo the selection of the king, to choose someone else, believing that undoing her rule will save the kingdom. If granted, she will become a true heroic spirit, bound to serve the world eternally. Her own life and deeds erased from history. To Shirou, this is a fate worse than death. He refuses to accept that he has to, or that as the answer to Saber's suffering, to obliterate her from memory and enslave her to a cosmic system forever. Before they can continue their conversation, the house is suddenly attacked by Castor and her skeletal warriors. Saber and Shirou head out to face her while Rin defends Ilya. During their clash, Castor reveals that she had already killed her master and that assassin had been eliminated. While Saber charges in, resisting Castor's spells with her naturally high magic resistance, Saber narrowly avoids a deadly trap meant to bait her into receiving Castor's noble phantasm. Shirou throws himself into the attack instead, shielding Saber and getting wounded in the process. Castor then reveals her true aim. She intends to capture Saber and use her to defeat Lancer, the remaining servant. But before she can act, an overwhelming force descends. A golden orbed servant appears and annihilates Castor with a storm of noble phantasms. Saber is horrified. She recognizes him as an archer from the previous Holy Grail War, the mysterious eighth servant. The Golden Warrior, smug and terrifying, declares he will claim Saber for himself before disappearing. Upon seeing him, Ilya fires an attack at him, which is rebounded to her. Rin blocks the attack, but Ilya ends up fainting. In the aftermath, Saber reveals a painful truth. Her former master was Kiritsugu, Shirou's adopted father. She explains that he abruptly ordered her to destroy the Holy Grail without explanation 10 years ago, resulting in the massive fire that engulfed Shirou's past. She had seen him as a cold, ruthless killer, until viewing Shirou's memory, which showed Kiritsugu's softer, more human side. Still seeking clarity, Shirou decides to visit Kyrie at the church. He explains Saber's situation and asks whether there's a way to let her live a normal life. Kyrie, ever calm and inscrutable, answers that the only way to force Saber is to force Saber to drink from the Holy Grail, an act that would anchor her to the world, but also ensure her death in this timeline. He also reveals that Ilya carries the vessel of the Grail within her. As Shirou leaves, he warns Kyrie of the golden servant's appearance, news that visibly surprises the priest. Walking home through the fading light, Shirou comes to a final realization. Shirou has fallen for Saber. From the moment he saw her, he has been drawn to her strength, her loneliness, her unwavering sense of duty, and now, more than ever, he has resolved to protect her, not as a warrior or servant, but as a person. He vows to give her the peace that she never had in life, and the happiness she still believes she doesn't deserve. This development was basically inevitable given the direction of the realm and standard anime tropes. Shirou falling in love with Saber felt like a foregone conclusion. But honestly, considering how Day 6 played out, I'm surprised the story didn't lean more into a heavily or I lean more heavily into the expected outcome after this information is revealed. Instead, the narrative is slowly building towards something more grounded and character-driven, but I'll explore that after the route's conclusion, which is happening after the following day. Day 14. Shirou decides to take Saber out on a date in an effort to make her happy and convince her to give up her wish. The date goes awkwardly, but without incident, and it's a surprisingly well-paced break from the tension of the main story, especially considering how some earlier slice-of-life sections dragged. However, as they walk home across the bridge, the moment breaks down into an intense argument about Saber's wish. Shirou, having come to understand Saber generally hates fighting, continues to pressure her into abandoning her desire to change the past. He wants her to choose happiness and reward herself again for a future that may not change. Saber, in contrast, holds firm to her sense of duty. She sees the girl as a means of fulfilling her oath as king, even if that means erasing herself and her history. Neither backs down. The argument escalates, ending with Saber coldly telling Shirou that she doesn't need him and will finish the war alone. Shirou runs off in frustration, but crucially, this moment sparks a key change in him. He finally begins to reflect on the implications of his ideals, recognizing that he's been forcing his beliefs onto others rather than understanding who they really are. This is also mirrored in his projection magic, copying objects based on his own interpretations rather than creating anything truly original. But more on that idea later. When night falls and Saber hasn't returned, Shirou sets out to bring her home. He finds her standing alone at the bridge. Still lost and emotionally shaken, they reconcile and begin walking home together, only to be ambushed by the Golden Archer once more. This time, the servant reveals his identity, Gilgamesh, the king of heroes, with his noble phantasm, Gate of Babylon. He overwhelms Saber with a barrage of legendary weapons, each the prototype of a servant's noble phantasm. Saber prepares to counter with Excalibur, but Gilgamesh draws his true weapon, the swirling, reality-shredding Ea, and activates Enma Elish. Their clash is one-sided. Saber is completely overpowered. Injured, Shirou unconsciously heals himself through projection and rises to fight, copying Caliburn to face Gilgamesh, the king of heroes. Gilgamesh, unimpressed, draws its original, Merodach, and defeats him again. Yet Shirou keeps getting up. While confessing his feelings to Saber, he unexpectedly projects a mysterious artifact, one strong enough, with Saber's aid, to reflect Gilgamesh's attack back at him. Wounded, the Golden Servant retreats. Saber hugs the wounded Shirou and tells him that he is retreat, Avalon, the source of King Arthur's immortality. Shirou passes out, slipping into a vision of Saber's final battle at Camelot, where her kingdom fell in the rebellion led by her son Mordred. When he awakens, Saber is tending to him. Shirou, now fully aware of his feelings, again begs her to live for herself, to be happy. He tells her that he loves her. She kisses him, but continues to refuse his request, remaining bound to her duty. Still, that night, Saber asks to remain by his side, and the two share a peaceful night together. In the remastered version I played, it's implied that they slept together, but nothing is explicit. It's left to interpretation. The scene, along with the ritual in which Saber gets some of Shirou's magic circuits, are changed in the remaster to be less explicit. Honestly, I preferred this centered approach. The original version's explicitness felt unnecessary, especially considering Saber's nature as a reincarnated heroic spirit. I hadn't even thought of these scenes that way until writing this and learning about the differences, but I'm glad the remaster had handled it more gracefully. Had I played the original version, I'm honestly not sure how I'd felt about the story. Day 15. Shirou heads to the search to seek Kyrie's advice about Gilgamesh, but when he arrives, Kyrie is nowhere to be found. Despite an overwhelming sense of dread urging him to leave, Shirou presses on and investigates the church's basement. There, he uncovers a horrifying secret, a hidden chamber filled with dissolving, barely living bodies. To his shock, he recognizes them. They are the orphans who had survived the fire alongside him. Kyrie arrives and confirms it. these children were kept alive for years to feed their magical energy to its servant. As Shirou tries to flee, he is fatally wounded by a lancer, revealing that the supposedly neutral Kyrie is in fact his master. Back at the house, Saber learned through Rin's investigation that Lancer's original contract had been stolen early in the war, and she quickly deduces the truth. Sensing Shirou's life is in danger, Saber rushes into the church with reckless speed, destroying a large portion of the building in her desperation to reach him. She confronts Lancer, and the two briefly clash before Kyrie holds the fight and begins his psychological assault on Shirou. Kyrie tempts Shirou with the Holy Grail, playing on his guilt and offering him a chance to erase his fire and his trauma. Shirou is momentarily shaken by the idea of undoing the event that shaped his life, but ultimately rejects it. He stands firm in his belief that the past cannot and should not be changed, and that his path is one he chose with conviction. Turning to Saber, Kyrie makes the same offer, commanding her to kill Shirou in exchange for the Grail. But Saber, moved by Shirou's resolve, and finally seeing the futility of her wish, chooses instead to accept her past, if he no longer wishes to undo her life. Frustrated, Kyrie reveals the true extent of his betrayal. Not only is he Lancer's master, he's also Gilgamesh's. Saber, Shirou, and even Lancer are stunned. Kyrie explains that the Holy Grail is a corrupted vessel that grants wishes only through mass destruction, and that it was his wish that ignited the fire 10 years ago. Ordering their deaths, Kyrie commands Lancer to kill Shirou, and Gilgamesh to kill Saber. But Lancer, no longer able to follow such a master, turns on them both, giving Saber and Shirou a chance to escape at the cost of his life. Gilgamesh, ever proud, knows that he would have done the same had Lancer not acted first, though because he views Saber as his possession. Outside, Saber admits her wish was born of selfishness. She accepts Kitsuga's actions and commits fully to Shirou's goal to destroy the Holy Grail. It's here Shirou learns the truth behind his healing ability. He has Saber's final noble phantasm, Avalon, embedded in his body, placed there by Kitsuga to save his life. This sheath not only summoned Saber during both wars, but it was also what repelled Gilgamesh's attack earlier. When they return home, they find Rin gravely wounded and Ilia missing. Rin reveals that Ilia is the vessel of the Holy Grail itself, and Kyrie has taken her to Ryu Temple to complete the summoning. Before passing out, Rin entrusts Shirou with the Azoth sword. With the final battle imminent, Shirou returns Avalon to Saber, its rightful owner. They storm Ryu Temple, where the corrupted Grail, now a gaping void of curse-laden mud, is being summoned from Ilia's body. Saber confronts Gilgamesh, while Shirou faces Kyrie. Kyrie reveals Grail's mud is the curse of Angra-Mainyu, pure evil that seeks which to consume the world. His wish, to watch humanity suffer at the brink of death, all for his twisted form of entertainment. As the battles rage, things look bleak. Gilgamesh prepares to kill Saber using A, and Kyrie smothers Shirou in the Grail's curse, mocking Kitsuga's death as a divine punishment for destroying it. Gilgamesh tries to force Saber to consume the mud and gain a body so he can keep her as his queen. She refuses, and he finally unleashes the full power of Anima Eilish. At the climax, both Saber and Shirou turn the tide using Avalon. Saber, now reunited with the true Avalon, blocks Anima Eilish completely and counters with a point-blank Excalibur, killing Gilgamesh. Shirou, projecting Avalon from his memory, nullifies the curse and stabs Kyrie with the Azoth sword, detonating its spell and killing him. Kyrie recognizes it as a gift he once gave to Rin before dying. With their enemies gone and Ilia freed, Shirou uses his final command spell to have Saber destroy the Grail once and for all. As dawn breaks, Saber and Shirou share a final moment. she confesses his love to him before vanishing. 2 months later, peace has returned. Shirou now lives with Taiga, Sakura, and Ilya, who has joined their household. On his way to school, Shirou meets with Rin. They talk about Saber, both agreeing to keep her memory alive. Shirou remains committed to his ideals, with no regrets about letting Saber go. Meanwhile, Saber returns to the site of her final battle, Kemlon. As Artoria, she no longer wishes to change fast. Mortally wounded, she is carried to the forest by Bedivere. She speaks of the dream she had, and asks if she might see it again when she sleeps. Bedivere lies, telling her she will. After fulfilling her final command to return Excalibur to the lake, Saber finally passes on, having found the peace she sought for centuries. Thus concludes the Fate route of Fate Stay Night. While certain moments, especially in days 6 and 7, initially made me question whether I even wanted to continue the story, the final half of the route completely shifted my perspective. What began as a conflicted reading experience became something I now can't wait to keep exploring. I can understand some of the awkwardness on day 6 and 7 may stem from translation issues, but day 7 still lingers as a sore spot. That said, by the end, the narrative seems to redeem Shirou, or at least add enough depth to his in contradiction to suggest he's not as misogynistic as those early moments might imply. It's possible that some of that discomfort is again due to localization quirks, but the conclusion shows a Shirou who's more self-aware, vulnerable, and ultimately willing to stand alongside Saber rather than dominate her. What truly sold me was the ending, which had echoes of the end of Evangelion, not in the plot, but in tone and existential weight. The summoning of the Grail, an unspeakable cosmic horror that isn't conventionally frightening, but conceptually overwhelming, was deeply compelling. The idea that the Grail grants wishes in the most brutally efficient way, not out of malice, but cold logic, adds to its disturbing nature. A classic monkey paw setup, but filtered through a much grander metaphysical scale. Kyrie stands out as one of the most fascinating villains I've encountered. His belief that humans are pure in the moments before their deaths is twisted, yet poetic. He's not traditionally antagonistic. He's a metaphysical contradiction in his cult. A nihilist who craves meaning through others' destruction, who watches the world burn just to feel something. The narrative's darkest turns, especially the horrors of the Grail, the use of orphans, and Kyrie's gleeful descendant into sadistic horror, feel almost psychedelic in how suddenly and radically they shift the story's tone. Like Evangelion, Fate uses these shocking moments not just for drama, but to force reflection on identity, morality, and the self. Comparing Fate Stay Night to other visual novels I've experienced, Doki Doki Literature Club and Higurashi, I can see now why visual novels are uniquely suited for exploring horror-adjacent themes. Where traditional novels might describe some indescribable horror in 3 paragraphs, visual novels can engage all senses, unsettling visuals, stuttering sound design, eerie music, and carefully timed pacing. At the same time, they preserve the introspective depth of novels by keeping you in the protagonist's thoughts. Still, Fate isn't horror in the same way Higurashi is. It leans more into the existential and philosophical, much like Evangelion, with horror elements as emotional punctuation rather than the core tone. It's not about being scared, it's about confronting what fear means, of death, of failure, of wasted life, of misused power, and ultimately, of choosing a future despite it all. And now, onto the character analysis. First, let's start with Shirou, and get him out of the way. Shirou Emiya begins the Fate route as a frustrating protagonist, idealistic to the point of delusion, self-righteous, and often blind to the feelings of others, particularly Saber. His obsession with protecting her, even against her will, often crosses into controlling behavior, and some of his statements early on come off as borderline misogynistic. At that point in the story, it was difficult to see what others saw in him. Day 6 and 7 especially nearly derailed the entire experience for me. But to the story's credit, it doesn't let those flaws go unchecked, and instead uses them as the foundation for a meaningful character arc. What ultimately redeems Shirou is the way he grows. His confrontation with Saber at the bridge becomes a major turning point, exposing how he projects his ideals onto others rather than truly understanding them. That disconnect mirrors his magecraft, projection magic, where he creates imitations instead of originals. In trying to protect Saber, he isn't really seeing her for who she is, only who he wants her to be. But over time, especially in the final stretch of the route, Shirou begins to understand the damage in that thinking, and starts respecting Saber's agency, even if it challenges his own worldview. Concluding the story with him destroying the grill is the correct choice. While it clearly mirrors the decision made by Kiritsugu 10 years ago, it also represents Shirou's growth and the maturity of his convictions. Kirie finds satisfaction in the desperation of people clinging to life at death's door. Shirou, on the other hand, is haunted by those same final moments. Instead of using them as justification for cruelty or nihilism, they become the foundation for his resolve to do better, to move forward. His trauma doesn't define him, it propels him forward. The story could have easily taken the emotionally convenient route of having Shirou wish for Saber to remain with him forever, but that would have betrayed everything the story and characters had worked toward. It would have invalidated both Saber's journey of self-acceptance and Shirou's growth from naive idealist into someone who respects the painful realities of choice, sacrifice, and letting go. Honestly, considering some of the more questionable decisions early in the story, I wouldn't have been surprised if it had gone that way, but it didn't. And because it didn't, the ending feels earned. In the end, Shirou's arc in the Fate route is satisfying, not because it's clean or perfect, but because it's messy, self-critical, and ultimately redemptive. He's clearly not a flawless hero, and while he does have some plot armor moments, his story as a whole shows how his flaws make him who he is. A flawed protagonist with actual flaws, not just the kind you put on a resume like I care too much or I am a bit too much of a perfectionist. While Rin is the protagonist of the Fate Stay Night series as a whole, her role in the Fate route is more secondary than central. Still, even in a supporting position, Rin leaves a strong impression. Her character functions as both a stabilizing force and a counterbalance to Shirou's impulsive idealism, offering moments of wit, competence, and emotional insight. Right from the beginning, Rin is portrayed as a capable mage, far more knowledgeable and pragmatic than Shirou. She's technically his rival in the Holy Grail War, but she frequently puts her rivalry aside for the sake of logic, safety, or just basic human decency. She heals Shirou, protects him, guides him, and, most importantly, calls him out when he's being unreasonable. Her no-nonsense attitude towards Shirou's over-perfectionist and Saber, and his habit of throwing himself into danger without thinking, provides a voice of reason that the player desperately needs during his more reckless moments. Rin's personality is a tsundere trope, aloof and guarded on the surface, but warm and earnest underneath. What keeps her from feeling too much like a trope is that the story never reduces her to just that. Similar to Asuka and Evangelion getting yet another mention. She's competent, emotionally intelligent, and deeply lonely in a way that the route doesn't explore in full, but still hints at enough to make her feel like a full character, which I'm assuming will be explored in the limited plate works. Her aloofness isn't performative, it's how she learned to survive. She comes from a prestigious mage family, and the burden of legacy weighs heavily on her. The pressure rarely gets expressed overtly in the Fate route, but it hangs in the background of her decisions. Her meticulous planning, her refusal to act emotionally, and the way she tries to keep Saber and Shirou focused on the bigger picture rather than personal feelings. Even though the Fate route isn't hers, Rin still ends up being essential. She is the reason Shirou survives multiple encounters, the one who uncovers Kirie's betrayal, and the person who literally hands him the weapon that lets him defeat Kirie in the end. Her presence in the story feels like a reminder of what a different kind of protagonist might look like in this world. A smarter, colder, and more rational one. And while she's not the emotional center of this arc, she offers just enough empathy and insight to elevate it. Her reaction to Shirou and Saber's connection is assured, and her trust in Shirou at the climax shows a quiet kind of respect that doesn't get or need big speeches to land. By the end, Ren has suffered. Ilia kidnapped, herself wounded, but she remains composed, practical, and supportive. In the epilogue, in Shirou's brief exchanges, or her and Shirou's brief exchange feels earned. They both shared this terrible war, both lost something precious, and both chose to move forward without giving in to despair. Rin may not get the spotlight, but she never disappears into the background. She's a constant presence, not just narratively, but thematically, as a reminder of balance between emotion and logic, duty and desire, power and restraint. While Shirou and Saber burn with ideals and regrets, Rin keeps both feet on the ground, never losing sight of stars. But speaking of stars, we get into the third, and arguably most well-written of the three for the Fate route, Saber. Saber is the emotional and philosophical heart of the Fate route, its namesake and soul. On paper, she's arguably one of the most powerful and noble figures in the Holy Grail War. King Arthur, reimagined not as a grizzled medieval legend, but as a stoic, burdened young woman. But beneath that legendary veneer is a tragic paradox. A character who defines herself by duty, yet is haunted by the emotional cost of that very same idea. When I first learned Saber was King Arthur, I assumed it was typical anime shenanigans, turning a historical figure into a cute girl to appeal to a male audience. And while that may have been part of the initial design logic, the story goes far beyond that gimmick. It justifies the choice in a way that ends up being genuinely compelling. You see, Saber's arc is ultimately about identity, not just who she is, King Arthur, but how she defines herself as a king, as a servant, as a martyr, and eventually as a person. When introduced, she embodies every knightly virtue: loyalty, discipline, strength, and restraint. But from the very beginning, there's a rigid distance in how she carries herself. She doesn't eat with Shirou and Ren. She doesn't laugh or rest except to restore magical energy. She doesn't act human, because in her mind, she isn't. She's a tool of justice, summoned to fulfill a single purpose: obtain the Grail and rewrite her past. And that's what makes Saber so compelling. Not seeking the Holy Grail for power or selfish gain. Her wish is to erase her kingship entirely, believing that Britain's downfall was her fault. She wishes to endure herself. Her identity is wrapped in a crushing sense of guilt and responsibility that refuses to acknowledge her suffering. Her logic is tragically utilitarian. If she had never become king, perhaps no one would have died in vain. It's a warped version of the heroism Shirou clings to, but instead of saving others, Shirou's idealism demands she erase herself to save them. That's why her relationship with Shirou matters. It's not just romantic, it's philosophical. Shirou sees Saber as someone who deserves to be saved. Not because she's weak, but because she never lets herself be human. Their dynamic is tense, even frustrating at times. He's protective to the point of condescension, and she's stubborn to the point of self-destruction. But the conflict is the crucible for their growth. Shirou learns that ideals without empathy are hollow. Saber learns that a life without sacrifice, or a life of sacrifice without happiness is noble. It's tragic. What makes Saber's arc especially poignant is that she doesn't get a wish fulfillment ending. She doesn't stay with Shirou. She doesn't undo her past. Instead, her arc concludes when she finally accepts it. After witnessing Shirou's choice to destroy the Grail, and after seeing someone choose to live with their pain rather than erase it, Saber finally is able to do the same. She relinquishes the wish that has defined her since her death and returns to her own time, not as a ruler burdened by regret, but as a woman who for a moment found peace. This act of acceptance mirrors her final moments in life. In the epilogue, Artoria returns to Kenmore and orders Sir Bedivere to return Excalibur, the ending of the rule of King Arthur. But now, there's no sense of resignation, only quiet resolution. When she asks whether she'll see her dream again when she sleeps, it's not a desperate hope, it's peace. Saber is a tragic hero, but not because she falls. She's tragic because she never lets herself succeed. Her journey in the Fate route is one of reclaiming agency, not just in battle, but emotional. She learns, at last, that a life lived solely for others is not the same as a life well lived. Now for theory time. Now that I've wrapped up my thoughts on the Fate route, it's time to speculate on what might happen in the next two, Unlimited Blade Work and Heaven's Feel. Most of my theories are centered on Unlimited Blade Works, but I'll touch on both. Before diving in, I should clarify how I'm approaching these routes. I'm assuming they won't just be alternate endings to the same story, but entirely alternate paths. Different narratives that share characters and world rules, but explore new dynamics based on key turning points. Kind of like a branching timeline. Change one thing and everything spirals from there. For Heaven's Feel, I know very little beyond the fact that it centers on Sakura. There are small hints in the Fate route that she's more important than she lets on. One moment in particular stands out. In the prologue, before the routes even split, meaning the scene should be canon to all three paths, Sakura tells Rin about a blonde foreigner, asking for directions. That foreigner looks exactly like Gilgamesh, the 8th servant revealed late in the Fate route, currently aligned with Kyrie. That encounter raises a lot of questions. Sakura shouldn't be involved in the Holy Grail War, at least according to Shinji, but the fact that she met Gilgamesh, even casually, feels suspicious. I can't say much beyond that, but I'm guessing Heaven's Feel will finally dig into her backstory, motivations, and her relationship with the Mattel family. I don't expect her to stay a background character, and knowing this is her route, I bet she plays a much bigger role emotionally and narratively than in the other two. Now onto Unlimited Blade Works, which I expect to heavily focus on Rin and Archer. I'm fairly confident that Shirou will be the main point of view character, or at least share the spotlight. I'll preface this section by saying while I've done my best to avoid spoilers, a few things have inevitably slipped through, and those bits have influenced the theories I'm about to share. These aren't entirely original deductions from the Fate route like my Heaven's Feel plots. They're informed by guesses based on light exposure. So, I've heard Archer's Noble Phantasm is Unlimited Blade Works, as that's his ultimate in Honkai Star Rail, the game, which I started down the Fate rabbit hole to begin with. Which I assume is what the route is named after, Unlimited Blade Works. It supposedly lets him summon the Field of Swords, very similar to Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon, though I suspect Archer's version is an imitation, and that's a key distinction. Only one character in the Fate route has shown the ability to create imitations, Shirou. And Shirou's projection magic, which mirrors Archer's, makes me think that their connection from Saber. Brings me to the theory based on the other thing that I've heard floating around. Archer is Shirou. I don't know the mechanics behind this, maybe time travel, maybe alternate timelines, but it would explain why their abilities line up and why Archer seems so strangely antagonistic towards Shirou at times. There's also the fact that Archer, in the Fate route, is implied to have influenced Shirou's training and projection magic indirectly. If that's true, it could be a closed loop. Archer teaches Shirou the skills that eventually lead to him becoming Archer. Classic time paradox. Also, in the prologue, Archer gives Rin her pendant back, while Shirou has the pendant on day 3 of his perspective. As for the route's conclusion, I suspect that unlike the Fate route, Saber might not be the one in the spotlight. I'm unsure if she'll survive the story, but I don't think she'll be central. She'll be involved as Shirou's servant, though her characterization will change as she won't have bonded with Shirou as much as in the Fate route. I have a feeling that Rin and Archer will play more of a direct role in resolving the Grail conflict. My best guess, they'll win it. Maybe not in the literal sense of claiming the Grail, but in the sense that they're the ones who make the decisive choice about it, similar to Shirou, Saber, and the Fate route. There are still a few lingering mysteries from the Fate route that I suspect will be addressed in either of the next two arcs. For one, we never found out who Assassin or Lancer's original masters were. Lancers being before Akira's took over, and the same goes for Haster. These feel like plot threads deliberately left hanging, waiting to be explored further. We also met Castor and Ryder, but their true names were never revealed, something I imagine will be a major moment in either Unlimited Blade Works or Heaven's Feel. Castor in particular felt like a character with more depth than the Fate route had time to explore. Her presence was memorable, but extremely brief. There's a clear sense that the story is holding something back. While we did see the noble phantasms of both her and Ryder, I'll be honest, I don't know enough about mythology to make an educated guess on their identities. My knowledge of King Arthur pretty much starts and ends with Sonic and the Black Knight, so I'm not exactly pulling from a deep well of historical context here. Ryder being described as a demonic spirit rather than a heroic spirit was also intriguing, and I'm curious to see how that ties into her background. And then there's the whole closed time loop thing going on with Archer. Makes me wonder if not every Saber is necessarily a historic figure. Maybe some of them are similar to Archer's predicament. That said, I'm deliberately avoiding looking into any legends or historical references until I finish Heaven's Field, just to keep myself spoiler-free. So for now, that's where my speculation ends. I'm trying to get this video out as quickly as possible so I can dive straight into the Unlimited Bladeworks anime, and hopefully finish the entire thing in under 48 hours. That way, I'll be able to start the Honkai Star Rail collab with mostly full context. Because of our tight turnaround, I haven't had time to properly proofread or revise any of this, so what you're reading and watching is essentially a raw stream of the plot, just as close as I can get to my full impressions before they fade. This script alone took me a little over 9 hours of non-stop writing, so if it comes off as a bit rambly or disorganized at times, I apologize. I'm now about to put together the slideshow to go with it, which you're currently seeing, which I'll review after I wake up. For context, it's currently 3:36 AM on Thursday, July 10th. My goal is to finish watching Unlimited Bladeworks before 2 PM on July 11th, and then I'll be offline for about a week. During that time, I'll try to work on my analysis of the Unlimited Bladeworks and Heaven's Field visual novel routes, but realistically, I might not be able to start that until I get back. If you have any feedback or thoughts on this, I will be able to see and respond to them while I'm gone on my trip, and on stream pulling for Saber Friday, but probably not while I'm binging Unlimited Bladeworks. In any case, thanks for listening to my ramblings, and I guess I will see everyone in the next one.